Welcome to TotalPicture Radio. We are here in Las Vegas, Nevada at the Recruiting Trends Conference 2013, and joining me is our good friend Kevin W. Grossman.
Thank you, Peter. You are my good friend as well.
Thank you.
Thank you so much
and
for having me.
And you can find Kevin on Twitter at Kevin W. Grossman, and he is also part of the Tchat phenomenon on Twitter.
Thank you. Yeah.
Kevin recently joined PeopleFluence.
I did.
Thank you so much for taking time to speak with me here in Las Vegas.
Thanks for having me, Peter. I'm excited. Yeah, always love talking with you.
Great. So this morning we got into our session, and I found this sitting in front of me, and it says the 3 corporate recruiting trends you can't afford to ignore: how LinkedIn, mobile, and big data are changing the game. A white paper published by Recruiting Trends and PeopleFluence. So,
exactly.
There's some very interesting stats in this thing, especially around LinkedIn. So tell us a little bit about some of the findings in this white paper.
Sure, absolutely. And the good news is that this is very short and succinct and easy to consume.
Yes, it is.
And it's well written. I've been a big fan of Recruiting Trends. So the 3 trends, the first one of the 3 trends in you can't afford to ignore in corporate recruiting is, of course, the LinkedIn phenomenon. There was actually a lot of talk about that today.
There was.
In the different sessions, and I think for the most part, most corporate recruiters, and according to the statistics that Recruiting Trends came up with, nearly 85% of corporate recruiters are using LinkedIn, which you would think that it should be closer to 100 technically, but the good news is that a big portion of the recruiting world is using LinkedIn today. Mm-hmm. One thing that I thought was interesting, though, is that another statistic too from that research is that almost 50% of the U.S. workforce now has a LinkedIn profile. And I'm very, very happy with that because I'm a big advocate of having an online profile. I mean, not necessarily plugging LinkedIn, which LinkedIn is fantastic, but just the fact of let's do away with the resume and have more of a portable online format for your CV, your profile, your professional career.
Exactly.
To me, I think is critical in today's workforce, in today's world of work.
And having a LinkedIn profile to me is, I mean, if you have one, if somebody Googles your name, usually the first thing that's going to come up is your LinkedIn profile. Right. And if you don't have one and you're looking for a job, recruiters are going to go, this person isn't even on LinkedIn. What's going on here?
Now, what's interesting, I want to come back to a little point that came up today, and it's not part of the research, but I think it's important to note about people actually kind of hiding their profiles. But I'll come back to that in a second. The other thing that I thought was interesting out of this research for this paper was the fact that nearly 60% of the recruiters, when they were polled for this research, they're using LinkedIn also to promote employer brand.
Exactly.
Which I think is great because, again, there's been a movement for the past few years anyway of more corporations, big and small, investing in their corporate career sites and their social channels, besides not just LinkedIn, but to have a constantly evolving and updated corporate profile on LinkedIn, as well as Facebook and other places too, but we're talking about LinkedIn now. Is extremely important. It was great to see that number is so high.
Exactly.
That they're using LinkedIn for that, and they do have some really great tools on their corporate profile page, embedding video, streaming content from other sites. So that's pretty exciting.
Yeah, and I think it is really relevant for people to understand that companies really are investing a lot of time and resources in building out their LinkedIn profiles, their LinkedIn company pages, and they're putting a lot of information up there.
Right.
Because again, it's not just that they're out there trolling for candidates; they're out there really trying to promote their culture, their corporate, and employer branding, and give people some real background on their organizations.
LinkedIn has, according to their own stats, every second there's 2 people that are signing up for a profile. I think it's something like that.
Something like that, yeah.
Something like that. It's just a lot, So the fact that nearly 50% of the U.S. workforce has a profile that's going to continue to grow. There is the case, and I think this is always going to be true about very specialized skill sets and professions and careers that will be late to the party, or they're pulling back from using these services. Like, for example, a lot of very specialized IT people. Now, have been getting, unfortunately, spammed a lot. And these are, not by the savvy recruiters don't do that. We know they don't do that. But a lot of people are, so they're using LinkedIn, they're sending a lot of in-mails out, they're spamming a lot of folks. So in fact, what's interesting is that I was brought to my attention by a candidate I was interviewing for my team with People Fluent for a product marketing manager role, who actually had masked their profile to make. And it was misleading to me, but and of course he apologized. He said, "Let me tell you why, because his resume was different than his profile, because he was tired of getting pinged, so he made it kind of downplayed his skills because he was tired of getting hit." But I think that's a rarity. I think we're going to have more people. And there was another one of our clients, Spectrum Health, was for People Fluent, was telling me last night that they have a lot of doctors that aren't on LinkedIn, obviously, and they have 50-page resumes that are much more difficult to manage. But those are anomalies. I think we're going to continue to see LinkedIn growth, more corporate branding, employer branding happening on there. And anyway, it was great research. And another stat that I wanted to kind of reference is that there are 45 million LinkedIn people searches per month.
That's a lot.
It's just unfathomable what's going on. So that's exciting to me because, again, I think that plays to the fact that more professionals are building out their online profiles, and corporate recruiters are finding these individuals on their sites, and they're posting their jobs there as well. And there's the fact, part of the research touches on that more organizations with their ATSs are getting the LinkedIn integration API. So, and getting that activated so that they can apply directly using their LinkedIn profile.
Right. The one-click apply.
Yeah, and I mean, and that's not many applicant tracking systems in the space right now, including People Fluent. And although we have a pretty unique integration with LinkedIn, that's pretty exciting. But that also transfers over to mobile, which is kind of the next trend that we can jump to if you wanted to talk about that.
Yeah, let's talk about mobile because boy, that has been a topic of conversation here at this conference. And that, I was recently at the Mobile Recruiting Summit in Atlanta, Georgia.
Sure.
And, Ed Newman gets up from iMomentous and he says, only 5% of the Fortune 500 allow for mobile apply, So there's a real disconnect that's happening with organizations that are trying to mobile optimize their career sites, but you got to get to that last step, which is the application through a mobile device.
Right, and I think what's interesting is about the research that was put into this white paper from Recruiting Trends was basically saying that according to their data, 40% of recruiters have received an application using a mobile or tablet device. Now that's exciting though, because that's a bigger number. I think the reality is that, and I think we're hearing it more too when we come to these conferences and talk to the actual practitioners doing this work. They know what their customers, their candidates are using every day. I mean, at some point, what do the stats say? You probably heard this at the Mobile Recruiting Conference, but that the smartphones and tablets are going to exceed laptops and desktops, and just even in the next 5 years.
Yeah,
I mean, dramatic growth.
Joe Essenfeld from Jibe said by next year, 50% of the visitors to career sites are going to be on a mobile device.
Yeah.
And obviously a lot of that is going to be on a tablet. But there are verticals out there in healthcare, in transportation. Right. One of the presenters at Mobile Recruiting was UPS. How do they find their drivers? Their drivers are using mobile devices because they, for most part, don't even have PCs.
No, right. And it's just, most of us today in everyday use, we're getting more familiar with using our tablets and our smartphones, even for just everyday work.
Right.
Not just for getting on social and posting to Instagram and all that good stuff. But I think that that we're going to see that grow. So that was an interesting number to see, the fact that that recruiters are receiving more applications via their mobile devices and using that LinkedIn integration API as well. I think is going to be huge. That means that that's being adopted more, the actual profile as opposed to the CV for not every industry, but a lot of them, based on except for the anomaly. Coca-Cola was referenced in this paper a little bit too about the things that they're doing, and
Coca-Cola is really big into mobile.
Very much so. In fact, according to Recruiting Trends, and also I know because they're a client of People Fluent, which is exciting. they do plan on releasing a mobile application solution by the end of this year, early next, for recruiting globally. So,
Yeah. It makes sense because you look at a lot of the people who are hired at at Coca-Cola are drivers. They're delivering the product. Places.
Well, and there's the distribution house.
Right.
So, I mean, there's a lot of different divisions, and I'm sure I've heard the same from Chris Hoyt and PepsiCo as well, right?
Exactly.
I mean, they're doing a lot of that exciting work too. So, but they're not a client of mine. No, I'm just kidding. So I think another great stat too I wanted to point out is that according to the recruiting trends survey, 71% of recruiters use a smartphone for at least some percentage of their recruiting time and effort. So I think that we're just doing more. We're checking in more with our work with these devices, and that's only going to be critical. And finally, I think more companies are finally coming along. I think what's going to be exciting is that as more of, and I just wanted to give a plug to the Candidate Experience Awards.
Absolutely,
if I could.
absolutely.
We've been involved with being on the council. We've been involved in helping at volunteering our time. This is the third year that they've done it. A huge response, nearly 50,000 candidate surveys completed from over.
And these are very detailed.
Very 45
deep.
minute, which is a long time for somebody who wasn't hired to complete a survey about the process that they went through. Over 100 companies, but the point is that one of the things we're going to see in the data as they begin revealing this year's information and crunch the numbers and start writing it up in the report form, is that we continue to see an uptick in mobile. I know Elaine Orler has told me that, Jerry Crispin as well, and I think it's going to be exciting as we get closer to the end of the year and the release of this latest research. We're going to see more movement of leveraging social and recruiting and leveraging mobile, and it just elevates the whole experience for the candidates as well as the organization. And the candidate is a customer that companies serve. So
and one of the interviews I recorded here at the shows with Shally Steckrell, and one of the stats he told me is the response rate to text messages is 80%. You compare that to the response rate of an email or a voicemail or or an in-mail, and it's just off the charts.
Yeah, exactly. Although, and I love texting, but my problem is that I have to text in complete sentences. Though I can't do the shorthand, so that's why I don't text that much.
All right, so you're covering every base in hot topics in recruiting in this white paper. The last one I want to talk about is big data.
Big data.
There's been at least 3 sessions in this conference.
It's big.
That on big data.
Well, I think the big takeaway for me, and in the space today, just as big data applies to HR and recruiting, is the fact that there's a lot of information, a lot of talent information that's available from candidate to being onboarded as employee, as well as a contingent workforce and contractors, part-time temp. There's a lot of data that's in different disparate systems all over the place.
Right.
And now we actually have the ability, we have the technology, we have the systems in place where we can take the data from all these different systems, we can clean it up, we can put it under a microscope and under some kind of algorithm is what I mean, a microscope algorithm, and we can analyze it and we can put a lens on different subsets to know specifically what our talent pools look like, who are we really trying to recruit, where our skill shortages are, where the gaps are, where our strengths are in our workforce, as opposed to just always leaning on horribly complex spreadsheets and gut, which and we know that we humans aren't very good at making decisions and listening to their gut. So but I think the point is that with this, the point of the takeaway of the paper though is that yes, it's great. You have the systems out there today. You can analyze where you're at in your organizations today, and you can predict where you should be with your talent in the future. But when it comes to recruiting, we're kind of getting a throwback to the old days of humanizing that engagement. And I think one of the things that was difficult that we talked about earlier during the candidate experience is that when you have thousands of applicants coming in, it's really hard to respond personally to every single person that you're not going to hire. But there are ways that you can still work around that. But I think at the end of the day, recruitment is about relationship building.
Yes.
and I think with all the technology and all the big data analysis and predictive analytics and all this stuff that we can do now with the data, that's just going to help us hopefully free more time up for us to focus on the relationship building. And not just for those that we want to hire today, but for those that maybe 6 months from now, there'll be somebody that's applicable for a job. Maybe they become a customer of ours as well. Maybe I become a customer of theirs someday. I don't know.
Right.
I teased Jerry Crispin when he was on Tchat back in June, our Tchat radio show, and I kind of said, Jerry, aren't we all always a perpetual candidate? And he kind of said, well, that's quite zen of you, Kevin. But he said, well, you're right. We are. We're all perpetual candidates,
exactly.
Period. And customers of one another. So I think picking up the phone in the old-fashioned recruiting old school days and actually calling folks and making connections and keeping connections alive over time, leveraging the technology around us, that was the last takeaway of this paper. That was the key point. So.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, Kevin, thank you very much
You're welcome.
for taking time to speak with me. Now, for the folks who were not at this conference, who were not able to pick up this white paper, is there a URL that they can go to?
Yes, there is. It's a long URL, but what I can say, the easiest way to get there is to go to the peoplefluent.com website, go to the resources section, and search for 3 corporate recruiting trends you can't afford to ignore. And it's right at this date and time, it's right at the top. But it's really easy to find, and at some point, if you have an online version of this, I'll be happy to share the URL with you if you wanted to post it with that. But that's how they can find it.
I'll put it on your feature page on
Great.
Total Picture Radio. And thank you so much for listening and tuning in and watching. And we want to talk a little bit about the Recruiting Trends Conference coming up in 2014 in April in Washington, D.C. Along with People Fluent, take a look at the recruitingtrends.com website.
Please.
There's a lot of great content and articles by guys like this on recruiting trends, and check out their upcoming conferences and events. So this is Peter Clayton. Thank you very much for tuning in or watching Total Picture Radio.
Thank you.